Well, I think I'm recording and I think you can hear me. Let me just check. Yep, I can hear myself. It's like a terrible echo. Brilliant. Right. So, hello, everybody. How is everybody? I have not got anybody who's joined the webinar yet. So what I'm going to do is I have waited a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to sort of press on regardless. But I will be checking back just to see if anybody's coming in and, you know, what. If you have any questions or if you have anything you want to speak to me about, please do pop messages in the chat. I will be, you know, I'm also available in our group, and, you know, anything you need, you can always get hold of me if you want to know anything more about the stuff we talk about today. Now, a quick bit of housekeeping. You will hear some rattling about, and you will hear Twyla bark occasionally. She, well, it's quite windy here today for starters, and I'm actually actively training her not to bark at things as well as teaching you guys. Twyla is my puppy, so she's not quite well trained yet. She is a 12-month-old Springador, and she is an absolute little rat bag most of the time, and she you know, she keeps me on my toes. So if you do hear her barking today, then you'll be able to see basically how I deal with it. Okay. So you know, the thing with barking is we never want them to not bark. What we want is for them to not bark excessively or inappropriately. Okay. There's many reasons for that, and I will go through them with you as the course of the webinar goes on. But just, you know, just so you know, if this is not going to be the most professional webinar you've ever seen, it's not going to be the most polished webinar you've ever seen, but it will be a real one. Okay, so you'll hear and see my dog in action probably. And yeah, I mean, later on we've got some videos of my dear old Moo. We'll do some training. We'll do some actual physical training that you can do with your dog today or as soon as you're watching this video. And we'll go through the theory of barking and why dogs bark, and, you know, what we can do to make them feel better, I think, as well. So yeah, I am going to press on. So hopefully I'll be able to share my screen. And it looks like it's working. Fantastic. I just thought, did I remember to push the record button? Let me just double check. Yes, I am recording. Brilliant. Right, so help my dog to stop barking at triggers. So with that, first of all, we need to work out what a bark actually is and why dogs do it. And then we need to work out what a trigger is. Excuse me while I drink my coffee. I do have a speech impediment as well, so just bear with me. Sometimes I will need to stop and have a little drink. All right. So anyway, why do dogs bark? Well, dogs bark because they can't speak a human language and they need to communicate with us. They can speak in body language, and we can learn to read that, and I will go through that with you. And they do speak through a series of growls and whines and, you know, yips and barks and so on and so forth. But primarily they bark because they don't speak human. They need to communicate with us, and we are very we're not as attentive to a dog's body language as a dog is to our body language. So, and often we're not taught how to read it. So they use their barking to alert us to things. They use us to their barking to tell us things. Dogs in feral dogs, they don't actually tend to bark that much because they can pick up on each other's body language. So barking and whining and crying and that is very much evolved for us, for our benefit, so that the dog can communicate with us. So anyway, they bark because they can't speak human language and they need to communicate. They bark to relieve frustration and stress. It helps them feel better. I mean, if you think about it, if you have something going on in your life and you're not necessarily very happy about it, and you bottle it all up, it doesn't make you feel much better. But if you manage to talk about it, or if you manage to have a shout at somebody, if you have a row or anything like that, afterwards, your adrenaline levels start to come down a lot quicker because the barking, or in our case, the shouting or the talking, has relieved some of that stress. Okay, so sometimes dogs bark to relieve frustration and stress. If you sometimes, a good example of this would be dogs that are left home alone and they just sit and bark and bark and bark and bark and bark all day at the door. Now, the reason they do that is because they're getting it out of their system. Okay, so sometimes the barking actually does serve a purpose. It makes them feel better. So another reason that bark is high levels of arousal. So a dog that's sound asleep isn't a dog that's barking. a dog that is, you know, running around excitedly at the park and trying to get your attention and wants his ball and wants to play with the other dogs, and, you know, maybe sees another dog and they're like, they don't like dogs. All these sort of, they're all high arousal situations. So dogs bark because they're experiencing high levels of arousal. And also dogs bark to warn others to back off. You know, I'll go through the ladder of aggression with you, or the ladder of communication, as we now like to call it. But that's very, 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 that's the dog very strongly wording that they're not very happy with you being in close proximity to them, and they want you to back off a little bit, or they want the other dog to back off a little bit, or whatever trigger it is that they're barking at. Whatever it is they're barking at, they want it to back off. So dogs bark because they can't speak human language and they need to communicate. Dogs bark to relieve frustration and stress. They bark to relieve high levels of arousal, and they bark to warn others to back off. Excuse the rattling, I've got some sausage in a bag here for my dog, and I'm trying to keep her quiet beside me. And she's doing a very good job so far. I'm quite happy with her. So the canine ladder of communication, I mentioned it a moment ago. So dogs go through a whole range of body language before they get to the point where they're air snapping, growling, barking, biting. So usually these little signals at the bottom in green, you can spot them all the time. And sometimes their dog might be yawning or blinking because they're tired. But if they're yawning or blinking out of context, you know, then it could be that they're not tired. They're just trying to tell you that, you know, actually, I'm really not 100% happy with this. And would you mind moving away a little bit, or would you mind stopping doing that? And the same with squinting, nose licking. Again, sometimes you might see a dog just quickly lick the end of their nose, or maybe turn their head as they do it. And it's just their way of very politely saying that, actually, I'd rather you just not do that, or rather, you know, I'd rather you move away. I'd rather, you know, I'd rather this situation wasn't happening. And that's very, very polite behavior from your dog. Sniffing is another one. Well, often when dogs are feeling uncomfortable with a situation, they use sniffing as a way of almost changing the subject, you know. So it's kind of the equivalent of us scrolling through our phone, looking at our Facebook feed in the middle of a party. When everything's going on and it all gets a little bit too much, we just zone in on one thing. We might not even be that interested in, you know, our Facebook feed in the middle of a party, but it just gives us a moment of, you know, just focusing on something else that's not all the stuff going on around us, and it just gives us a moment to relax. Sniffing, especially when there's not actually anything to sniff at, does basically the same thing. So then the dog might go from that to sitting or laying down instead of interacting, and that's their way of saying, well, actually, I'd rather stay here than come over there and do whatever with you. They might get between you and their resources. So dogs that resource guard, obviously, you know, we all know what resource guarding is. It means when they're growling and they're trying to keep hold of their resources, the resources might be food or toys or bits of paper or God knows whatever it is they found, that, you know, the dog decides on what the resource is. But when they have a resource, before they escalate to the point where they're growling and, you know, being quite obvious with their guarding, sometimes they might just walk between you and their resource, or it might be they sit between you and your partner on the sofa, for example. They get between you and your resources, and that's just another polite way of saying, actually, I'd really like to just hang on to this. So from there, they might start tucking their tail under the body or lifting their leg. By lifting their leg, I mean the front leg. Sometimes they lift one of their front paws just slightly, and that can show a little bit of anxiety creeping in. Tucking the tail under the body is because they're hiding their scent glands at the back. It's almost their way of saying, I'm not here, you can't smell me, I'm not here. So another thing they'll do is they'll turn their head, but they'll keep their eyes on the thing that they're turning their head away from, and that means that you can see the whites of their eyes. So we call it whale eye, but if you see whale eye in a dog, then that can be an indication that they're either guarding something or that, you know, they're not too happy about something. So from there, they might freeze or pause in position. And this is when you're starting to notice that the dog is really quite unhappy. Now, we talk about the fight or flight response quite often, but there is also another part of that, which is freezing. And freezing is almost when the dog is trying to work out what to do. So they're almost trying to decide whether to run or whether to stay and fight, or, you know, basically what to do next to guarantee themselves a more successful outcome of whatever it is they're aiming for. So freezing or pausing in position, at the point your dog does that, that is a point where you should be taking a lot of notice of your dog. And a lot of the times I notice when I'm walking reactive dogs, if they are out on their walks, they often stop and look before they start to bark at the other dog, or before they start to bark at the car or whatever it is. And it's at that point when they're freezing or pausing that you should be listening to them and taking them away from that situation, because then they don't have to escalate to the next part. So the next part is when they stand still, like I just said, and they might stare. And you notice sometimes dogs, they get like a hard stare over their face. It's not like an interested, happy, like, you know, we're going to come and play stare. It's a staring at you stare. They might then tense their face. Sometimes with a dog with a tense face, you can see the end of their tongue curl up instead of it hanging flat. They get crinkles around their eyes and on their forehead. They might start baring their teeth. And then from there, you get the growling and the barking. And at this point, this is when you really, really should be taking notice of your dog. They're very, very unhappy. And a dog that is growling at you is warning you, look, I don't want to bite you, but I can. Okay, a dog that's barking at you is saying back off, or trying to get your attention quite seriously about something. Never, ever, ever tell a dog off for barking or growling, because you do not want them to skip that step out, because a dog that doesn't growl might go straight to air snapping and biting. Okay, so although it's unpleasant for us to listen to a dog, it's actually them trying to be avoidant of a fight with you, or avoidant of a situation where they are going to be forced into biting or air snapping or barking, or, you know, just escalating in general. So growling is really, really your point. Well, actually, I mean, I would say before that, I would say freezing or stopping in position is your point when you really need to be listening to your dog and just letting them, you know, come away from whatever it is that's upsetting them, or, you know, just help them with that situation. So now we know about barking a little bit, and we know it's not necessarily a bad thing. What is a trigger? So the Merriam-Webster dictionary site says to cause an intense and usually negative emotional reaction in someone, or for us it'll be in our dogs. I call our dogs a someone, so that's okay. So a trigger is a stimulus the dog experiences through sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch. And now this is a really important point, because sometimes we don't actually even know what triggers our dog, because we can't smell the things they can smell. We can't always hear the things they can hear. But whatever it is that thing is the trigger. That's what's causing them to want to bark. Okay, so a reaction follows the exposure to the trigger. So a trigger sets off a chain of events. The trigger happens, the dog responds to it. And today we're talking about that response as in barking. The dog creates a learned history of behaviour when exposed to the trigger, and generally repeats the behaviour if the behaviour had a successful outcome. So with that, if you imagine a dog that has barked at the postman, right? And they want the postman to go away. They bark, and away goes the postman. And then the next day, the postman turns up, they bark, and away goes the postman. And the next day, the postman turns up and they bark, and away goes the postman. The dog in his mind has had 100% success rate with that postman. So they repeat that behavior. And this is why lots of dogs hate postmen, because they bark at the postman and they go away. It works every single time, if you think about it. So a dog, they tend to create a learned history of behavior when exposed to the trigger. If they want the trigger to go away, or if the trigger is something that's unpleasant and they bark at it and that trigger backs off, or that trigger disappears, or that trigger is gone in some way, then they generally will repeat the behavior that caused that successful outcome. So what causes a dog to have a negative association with a trigger? Well, some of our dogs, unfortunately, have been through some very horrible things. They might have had a scary or unpleasant experience. Perhaps they were not looked after very well in a previous home. Perhaps they had a bad experience in the nest. Perhaps they had not very nice owners. Perhaps something happened, like a car crash, or perhaps a fight with another dog where they were on the losing end. There's lots and lots of things that can cause a dog to become afraid of something. Some dogs are just generally poorly socialized, and they don't have a very, very high confidence, and they just tend to get quite worried about new and novel things. A dog that is naturally quite pessimistic will always assume that the worst is going to happen when something new turns up. So that might just make them automatically think, right, well, I don't like this particular trigger because it's new and I don't know what it is. Pain or sickness. Sometimes with dogs, they don't think to themselves, oh, I've got a bad leg, that's because I stubbed it on the branch yesterday. They might feel like, oh, I've got a bad leg and I'm at home with this young boy and I don't like him. They sometimes blame the wrong things for their pain and sickness. And sometimes their behavior changes when they're in pain or if they feel sick as well. So sometimes it's not even that it's the trigger that's setting off that behavior. Sometimes the trigger is just one of many things that's setting off that behavior, including pain or sickness. So with any behavior change, we always say, go and see a vet, because dogs are really, really good at hiding it when they've hurt themselves or when they're not feeling well, because they don't want to be seen as a burden to the rest of the family. I know it sounds very strange, but if you imagine on a survival, way of thinking, dogs that are old or dogs that are very old, they can look after the puppies. Dogs that are puppies are the future. But if you think of the dogs that are sick or the dogs that have infections or anything like that, then they actually become a burden and a threat to the rest of the group. So with that, dogs tend to hide it when they have pain or sickness. And we do it ourselves as humans. We walk down the road, and even if you're feeling really rubbish, somebody will go to you, hi, how are you? And you go, oh, I'm fine, thanks, how are you? And it just trips off the tongue quite, we all do it, all social animals do it. And it's, but with dogs, it can actually just mean that, their behavior changes very, very slightly. So they could also be going through a fear period. So puppies generally have a couple of 2 or 3 fear periods throughout their young lives, when they become naturally more suspicious of things and worried about things, and they can develop phobias of those things just for no apparent reason at all. One of my dogs developed a phobia of pizza boxes when one fell out of the box when she was in the middle of a fear period. And I didn't actually know very much about behaviour at that point, so I didn't really know how to deal with it. But yeah, for her whole entire life, she could deal with any other box. All other boxes were fine, but pizza boxes, the delivery boxes, she was petrified of them. So, fear periods can do funny things to a dog. We'll talk about a bucket in a little while, but a full bucket can make a dog have a negative association with a trigger. And sometimes we just don't know what caused a negative association. We don't know why our dogs are behaving like that. So sometimes, and it doesn't always actually even really matter, depending on, what the trigger is. We'll deal with it the same way anyway, regardless of how it came about. So, but anyway, these are what causes a dog to have negative association with triggers. So we were talking about the bucket. So the bucket, I want you to imagine that inside every single dog, all day, every day, all packed, all sentient beings, is a bucket. And into that bucket goes all the adrenaline and cortisol and things that wind you up throughout the day, and things that make you happy and excited too. And so in that bucket for our dogs, for example, they might have a tummy ache. There might be birds. They might have seen some dogs. They might have diet problems. A lot of dogs are allergic. They might see cars as a problem. They might have been to the park and it had been a very exciting experience. There might be cats. There might be, they might be very itchy. They might be allergic this time of year. They might have tiredness, and all these things all pay into the bucket. Now, if you imagine 1 or 2 triggers, they only just pay in just a little bit into the bucket. So when the bucket fills, by the way, that's when the dog's reactive, when they're not coping, when they're highly anxious, when there's a lot of problems going on. So if you imagine only 1 or 2 things are paid into the bucket is not going to be full, and the dog's going to be able to cope. With all these things paying into the bucket is pretty soon going to be overflowing with all this stress and all these hormones and things. So with humans, it kind of looks a little bit like you wake up in the morning, you realise that you're late for work, you stumble down the stairs, you stub your toe on the door, you go to make yourself a cup of coffee and the milk's off, you get in the car, you get ready to go to work, you realise you haven't got hardly any petrol, so you have to go to the petrol station. When you get back to work, your boss is already growling because you're 5 minutes late. Your workmate turns around and says, oh, can I borrow your pen? And it's your last pen. And you go, no, you can't. So it's not your workmate that you're angry with, but it's all the things that have paid into your bucket up till that point. And at that point, your bucket overflowed. And that's why you bite your colleague's head off. You know, and it's the same with our dogs. All these things pay into their buckets. And once their buckets are full, then they can have reactions. So there's a reaction. So one of the things that I want you guys to do for our first little task is I want you to write a bucket list. Now, all the things that your dog finds exciting, all the things that your dog finds arousing. Hello, Twyla. All the things that your dog is afraid of, all the things that your dog looks forward to, all the things that your dog barks at. I want every single thing that your dog might get into a high arousal state over written down on your bucket list, okay? And we are now going to have a little break and I'm going to let you go away and do that. So if you're watching a recording, you can press pause at this point, go away, make your bucket list, and then come back when you're ready. Okay. There we go. And turn my headphones back down again. There we go, lovely. So you should all have a list of triggers, a list of things that fill your dog's bucket, okay? If you haven't done that, please go and do it now because it is important for the rest of the masterclass. Okay, so if you haven't done that, press pause, go do it. And if you have, then let's carry on. Now, apologies in advance for any strange noises in the background. Again, as I said before, my Springador puppy is absolutely full of beans. She's currently munching away on an antler and having the time of her life rolling around on the floor. Okay, so if you hear any strange noises, I apologize. It is not me, it is my puppy. Okay, and again, as I say, she does bark occasionally, and if she does bark, then I will show you how I deal with it. All right, okay, so with that, I'm going to crack on. At least I would if I could get the button to work. 2 seconds. Double check that everything's working on here. Pretty sure it is. Right, fantastic. So passive support. What is passive support? Well, passive support is things that we can do in our everyday lives that will just help our dogs not necessarily feel the need to bark as much as they do, to help them just to feel a little bit calmer in everyday life. We take a multi-pronged approach to dealing with barking and triggers, and passive support is one of those prongs. So first of all, we need to think about the dog's health and nutrition. So poor nutrition, allergies, health, aches, pains all lead to a dog who might be more highly aroused or anxious. Remember I said about things paying into the bucket? So if your dog has, possibly any problems with their food, with their health, they don't always show it. Sometimes we need them to see the vet in order for the vet to assess whether or not they have any pain. And sometimes even at the vets, they can still mask their pain and mask their problems. So if you ever spot your dog having, I don't know, just even a little limp or anything like that, be sure to always video it before you show your vet, because sometimes they won't actually behave as you would expect them to in the vet. Sometimes they can be very brave and very stoic, and that's not always very helpful when it comes to diagnosing things that might be wrong with them. Things like their nutrition is also very important. If you think of what we feed our dogs, sometimes it's not the most beneficial diet they could be having. So if you imagine kibble, for example, there's a lot of processed junk can go into some kibbles. Some kibbles actually are not too bad. Some kibbles are better than others for sure. But the cheaper ones, generally, they're just full of sugar and salt and lots of grains and all sorts of things that we don't necessarily want our dog to have a lot of. Now, don't get me wrong, grains are okay, but you don't want that to form the main part of your dog's diet. And a lot of kibble, in order to keep it cheap, is mostly grain. So what I want you to do is I want you to think in terms of the cheaper the food is, you know, and the more likely it is to not be very good for them. Now, I can always help you read a food label if you need some advice on what to feed your dog. But I also, I very much advocate feeding fresh. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean feeding raw, because I know some people are not that keen on feeding raw, but although my dogs do eat raw. But one of the things that I do find is that dogs that have a little bit of fresh food in their diet are generally less anxious, less highly aroused than dogs that live entirely on processed kibbles. Now, if you imagine, if you had a toddler and you fed them entirely on sweeties and McDonald's, then you wouldn't expect their behaviour to be particularly calm or steady. If you had a toddler and you feed them on fruit and vegetables and healthy foods, then you expect their behaviour to be much better. Okay, and it stands to reason that the same thing happens with our dogs. And also, if they have any sort of food reactions or any health problems or anything like that, then like I say, aches and pains and not feeling very well, all of that can just pay into the bucket, which then leads us to a more highly aroused dog. So always read your food labels, and just keep a real close eye on your dog's health and nutrition, and also check things like their ears, their teeth, their paws, their claws. Make sure that your dog's in tip-top condition, okay? So one of the big problems we see in dogs that are having far too much, that are barking far too much, is that they don't necessarily have enough sleep. People don't always realise, but dogs need a good 15 to 16 hours a day sleep. Whereas we have more deep sleep, more concentrated sleep, so we need less of it. We need probably 6 to 8 hours a night, and we concentrate our sleep into that time. Whereas dogs are very light sleepers, so they need to have more of it. And often they need 15, 16 hours a day. So if your dog's not getting the right amount of sleep, again, imagine like a toddler that isn't getting the same amount of sleep as they should be, then they're not going to be particularly stable. They're not going to be particularly sensible when it comes to things like triggers. So sometimes we actually have to add a nap into our dog's day if we have to. That might mean crate training them. It might mean just, you know, teaching them to settle. It can mean all sorts of things, but sometimes just having a nap will actually make a massive difference to your dog. Okay, so yeah, always make sure your dog's getting the correct amount of sleep. Now, the reason I talk about toddlers quite a lot is because our dogs' brains, believe it or not, they actually did some tests at a place called Emory University. There's a guy called Greg Burns. You look him up, he's very interesting. And they done brain imaging on dogs with different things in front of them, like pictures of their humans, pictures of hot dogs, etc., etc. And they worked out from that what parts of the brain light up when dogs see things they like, they don't like. They could work out emotions that the dogs were feeling, because corresponding parts of the brain that feel emotions in us flare up. The same thing was happening with the dogs. So they could see which things were going on in the dog's brain. They could see what a dog feels. They could see how a dog reacts to certain things. And what actually happened is they discovered that the dog's brain is roughly as developed as a 2.5-year-old to 3-year-old child. So they feel all the emotions that a 2.5 to 3-year-old child feels, which is how we know that dogs don't feel guilt, because a 2.5 to 3-year-old child doesn't generally feel guilt. Their brain hasn't developed to that that ability yet. Things like jealousy. Sometimes we think our dogs are jealous. Often they're actually just guarding, okay, because their brains haven't necessarily got to the point where they're able to feel jealousy. So, using toddlers, although a lot of people would say we shouldn't anthropomorphize, which is a very long way of saying compared to humans and look like, and discuss in terms of humans, but actually using toddlers to think of how our dogs' brains are working is a really, really good comparison. And yeah, if you imagine feeding your child junk and then them not getting enough sleep, then you're not going to have the best behaved child or dog that you could have. So yeah, always think about in terms of their health, in terms of nutrition, and in terms of sleep. So bucket holidays. Bucket holidays are the equivalent of a spa break. Okay, so or maybe a weekend off of work, or anything that helps you to calm down, to have a little chance to relax, no more triggers going in. And if you have a dog that is going around constantly with a full bucket, then what can happen is that they don't actually ever seem to get any better. They can't learn anything in that state. Nothing actually makes any difference. Doesn't matter what you do, things ain't going to get any better. So I tend to ask people to take a bucket holiday with their dogs. So that means the reason we say 48 to 72 hours is because it can take that long for all the stress hormones to leave the body. So what happens is when we're filling our bucket, the bucket doesn't have a chance to empty before we're filling it with more stuff. So it's constantly in a state of being full up. What we need to do is we need to empty that bucket. So we avoid all triggers for 48 to 72 hours to give the dog a chance to calm down. And then they find themselves, calmer. They're in a better state for learning. And whatever you teach them to help them calm down from the barking, because the barking itself pays into the bucket just by itself. So anything that we can do that helps to empty that bucket is going to really, really help them learn. So for a lot of dogs, that means not necessarily taking them on walks. And people are usually pretty shocked when I say don't walk your dog, because a lot of people think that if you have a dog that is barking, that's highly aroused, that's full of energy, that you need to walk them more, you need to get that energy out. But often it's that walk that's causing the problem in the first place, or the triggers that are on that walk are part of the problem. So by not going for that walk and instead doing other things like enrichment and calming activities, it's almost like giving your dog a weekend off of work. If you imagine their walk as like going to work, and you have a stressful week, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you go every single day. Come Saturday, you need a day off, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean you hate your job, or it doesn't necessarily mean that you hate all your workmates, or like you're reacting to all sorts of triggers while you're at work. It just means you're tired and you need a rest. And it's exactly the same with our dogs. Sometimes they need a day off from their walks. So when we're going for a bucket holiday, we often go no walks, or if you really insist on a walk, maybe have it first thing in the morning, last thing at night, when there's not going to be any other triggers around, or maybe in the middle of a field where there's nobody about, or you can hire fields. Hired fields are amazing for bucket holidays. So dogs, they do need physical and mental exercise every day, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in the form of a walk. You can get lots of exercise with your dog playing in the garden. You don't necessarily need to be out on a walk. You can get lots of mental exercise for your dog doing enrichment, but it doesn't need to be in the form of a walk. So when I talk about enrichment, what enrichment means is adding things to your dog's day. So it might be, instead of just walking them slowly around the path, it might be, you're right there, Twyla. Sorry. Right. So it might just mean instead of just taking them for a path walk, it might possibly mean that you let them sniff along the grass verges, and maybe even put stuff there for them to sniff out. It might be that you teach them a little bit of doggy parkour while you're out doing your walks and things, so that instead of just walking past benches, you're hopping up and over and under them. It might be that instead of putting their food in a bowl, that you are scattering it down the garden for them to go and find it. It's adding things in to make their day more interesting. Now, what actually happens is dogs were bred for thousands of years to do lots and lots of jobs, and you know, herding, hunting, etc., and be very busy. And then they would come home and they would be absolutely worn out from their day. Their whole bodies were designed to do all this stuff that they're no longer doing. Dogs nowadays, as opposed to their ancestors of 100 years ago, end up sitting around in the house on their own for like 8 hours a day sometimes. Sometimes they, you know, they don't necessarily see a whole big families like they used to. It might only be them and one other person. And they might spend their entire day just laying around in the living room, and dogs aren't designed to do that. So they still have all that mental energy that they need to use up. And enrichment is just one of the ways of, you know, making their day more interesting, helping them use up some of that mental energy. And the thing is, with dogs that bark a lot, they have generally a lot of mental energy. They need to expel it somewhere. This is why they end up barking. Excuse me, madam. Down here, come on. Thank you. That's why they end up barking. So what we need to do is we need to release some of that energy for them. And we do that, like I say, through enrichment. So enrichment, especially enrichment that involves using their nose, is going to be really, really useful and really beneficial to them, because that actually releases the opposite hormones to the stress hormones that they get from triggers. So that actually helps to promote the bucket emptying. So when we're doing bucket holidays, enrichment is really, really important. I mean, it's really important the rest of the time anyway, but especially when you're doing a bucket holiday with your dog. Now, one of the things that I always tell my clients to go and see is on Facebook, there's a guy called Shay Kelly. And Shay Kelly actually did so much work into enrichment. He based his entire degree around it, and his dissertation and everything else. And he has a group on Facebook of like half a million people, I think, are on it now. And the group itself is manned by behaviourists. So everything that goes on to that group is, you know, it's checked to make sure it's safe, it's useful. And that's, you know, kind of the thing that you want to be doing with your dog. Now, Shay actually wrote a book as well called Canine Enrichment, the book your dog wants you to read. And if you go and read that, it explains so much about enrichment and how useful it is and how good it is for your dog that, you know, you want to be getting on and doing that. Hi, Emma, how are you? Nice to see you. So when we're thinking about passive support for our dogs, we want to think in terms of stopping filling the bucket. We want to remove the triggers. We want to rethink our management. And we need to resolve our dog's emotional response to turn the trigger into good news. So that's remove, rethink, and resolve. Okay. Now, when we're thinking of management, we're thinking of ways of stopping the dog from actually performing the behavior in the first place. So what can actually happen is our dogs can practice a behavior over and over and over again, like I told you earlier with the postman. And what happens is they practice that behavior gets stronger and stronger, and they get better and better at doing it. So we need to actually stop them from practicing that behavior. So it might be using leads, it might be using long lines, it might be using doors and shutting them away from the place where they're barking. It might be using stair gates for the same reason. Crates are useful not only for management, but also for popping them in for their naps, as we discussed earlier. Things like covers so that they can't necessarily see out of windows, fences, obviously, so they're not running along barking at just things in the street. And basket muzzles are also very good, because if you have a dog that's barking, then sometimes that can lead to biting. So you need to train your dog to wear a muzzle. So what you want to do is you want to think of as much management as you possibly can in order to stop your dog from barking in the first place. So they're not rehearsing the behavior, they're not getting better and better at it. One of the things I always tell people is what we practice is what we get good at. So we want them to stop practicing that. Okay, so earlier on, I asked you guys to make a list of all your dog's triggers. And now we're going to start deciding what to do with them. So one of the triggers that I got asked about myself was postman. delivery guys, etc., etc. So we need to think, what are we going to do about this guy? How are we going to deal with this barking? Okay, how are we going to stop him paying into our bucket? So we need to remove, rethink, or resolve, or more. So remove would be stop the postman coming to the door. Well, that's not generally an option. It could be redirect our post somewhere else. It could be having a post box outside the house somewhere so that the postman doesn't come right up to the door. We could remove the postman, but that's not generally it's not the easiest way of dealing with it. What we could do is we could rethink our management. So we could have it so the dog can't actually get to the door when the postman comes. Maybe we could have the dog in the garden when the postman comes. Maybe we could have, stair gates and things in the way, or some sort of noise on so the dog can't hear the postman. There's different ways that we can manage it, or we could resolve it. Now, imagine if every single time the postman comes to the door, he popped a bonio through the door. Your dog's not going to bark at him to go away, because your dog's going to think, right, I like it when he comes because he brings me bonios. So we can resolve that barking. We can turn the postman into good news for the dog. Okay, Twyla, please don't do that. Yeah. Right, so we can turn the postman into good news for the dog. Or this one, oncoming dogs. That is another trigger, a big trigger that a lot of people have when it comes to their dogs and barking. So what can we do? Remove, rethink, or resolve? Well, we can't necessarily remove people from parks and, public places, but we can go to private fields where there aren't any other dogs. So we could remove them technically that way, although sometimes it's not the most convenient. It is an option. We obviously need to rethink our management, because we need to have dogs on long lines or leads or, muzzles or anything that's going to keep them safe. Because while the other dog, is coming towards us, you don't necessarily know if that dog's friendly either. So you need to be able to make sure that your dog is going to be able to come back to you. And if they're in the middle of a barking fit, they might not be able to. So you need to keep your dog on a lead. Now, there is a way of thinking that having the dog on the lead can actually increase the barking, because it triggers the fight or flight response. You take away the option for flight, i.e. running away, then it increases the chance of the dog wanting to bark and fight. And there is something to be said for that. However, we cannot take the risk of having a dog off lead if they're barking at other dogs. So you have to have that management in place. Now, what we can do is we can resolve. So if we resolve the barking, how the dog feels about the other dog, so that resolves the barking, then we will turn the other dog into good news. Now, your dog doesn't necessarily have to interact with the other dog. They don't have to play with the other dog. They don't have to really have anything to do with the other dog. They don't have to feel anything about them at all. But what we want them to be able to do is just be okay with the other dog. And if they can walk past the other dog without feeling the need to aggress, without feeling the need to bark, then job done. So what you can do is you can do something called the engage disengage game, which I will go through with you a little bit later. And we actually turn dogs into good news for other dogs by playing this game. So if your dog is particularly aggressive when it comes to other dogs, then it's always best to get hold of me or another behaviourist and get somebody to help you with it, because it's not worth taking the risk with animals, because they can go for each other. Problems can happen. So if there is any risk of aggression, always seek help. But I will talk you through the engage disengage game, which will be useful. Okay. So you're going to get your bucket list that you made earlier. And for every single trigger that's on that bucket list, I want you to remove, rethink, or resolve, or even more, just, do all of those options if you can. By immediately implementing the remove and the rethink lists, you'll see straight away a reduction in your dog's stress and barking. So by that, I mean, if you have a dog that barks out the window, if you put a film up on the window, frosted film, then the dog's not going to see things out the window to bark at. So straight away, there's going to be a reduction in the barking. That's just one example, there's plenty of them. But what will happen then is your dog will be getting less and less highly aroused and highly anxious, because they won't be feeling the need to look out the window and bark at things, which in turn will start to calm them down. So by immediately implementing the remove and the rethink lists, you'll straight away see a reduction in your dog's stress and their barking. Then when you've gone through your list and there are things that you can't remove and you can't rethink, you need to work on resolve. So one trigger at a time. There's no point trying to work on every single trigger because you'll be completely confusing your dog as to what you're trying to do. If you work on one trigger at a time and make that one trigger into good news, then you get a snowball effect whereby the dogs start to gradually feel better about life in general, and the next trigger and the next trigger and the next trigger are much easier to deal with. Okay, so think of one trigger to resolve, and I would actually start with the one that's going to be the easiest first. It might not be the dog in the park that's the easiest one to start with. It might literally be something as simple as somebody knocking on the door. You might ask them just to text you before they get there, for example, something like that. But just anything, you know, just it could be the postman putting the bonio through the door, and that's a really easy thing to do. You know, so work on the easiest things first, because then your dog is going to have less stress in their body when it comes to working on the harder things. Okay, so I want you to make your three lists: remove, rethink, and resolve. Okay, if you have any struggles with working out what to do with each trigger, please do get in touch with me and I will come up with a plan for you. Okay, so we are going to head off for our coffee break. So Emma, the last session has been recorded, so you will be able to catch up with all of this so far. And I will see you guys in a little while. If you are watching this on a replay, then you can press pause here and go and make your lists and then come back when you're done. Okay. All right, hello, and we are back in the room. Now, my earphone out so I can hear properly. Right, okay, so by now you should have a good idea of why your dog barks, what triggers are, what barking actually is, a little bit about body language. You know what the bucket is, you know why it's important and how to empty the bucket, and you know a little bit about passive support, so supporting your dog with their health, their sleep, and just their general, you know, day-to-day life, you know, admin, enrichment, that kind of thing. You know a bit about, well, you've made a bucket list and you hopefully have divided it into 3 sections: remove, rethink, and resolve. Okay, now the remove is fairly self-explanatory. You should be able to remove certain triggers from your dog's list straight away. Hence, that will remove some of the barking straight away. That will remove some of the stress straight away. You should be able to rethink some of your management so that you limiting the opportunities for your dog to practice their barking, which will again, teach them, well, it will stop them practicing the barking so they won't get better and better at it, but also it will help them with their stress levels. And that just leaves us with resolve. Now with resolve, we're going to start with the easy things first and then work up to the harder things. Now, the reason we want to do that is because we want our dog in the best frame of mind possible before we start working on their bigger triggers. So if we eliminate some of the easy ones first, then the dog will be in a better frame of mind for that. Okay, now, as I said before, I have my dog Twyla with me. She is a puppy and she does bark. If she does bark, then you will see how I deal with her in action. She's actually going to sleep now, thank God. She's been running around for 2 hours. It's been very entertaining at this end. And yeah, I do have a speech impediment, so we do take some breaks. And also because we will be doing some training and we are looking after dogs, we also have breaks anyway. So yeah, every time you see a coffee cup, you can go and pause and go get yourself a cuppa, do whatever. And if you need to stop at all, please just let me know. Okay, and otherwise I shall crack on. So, active support. Now, where passive support was helping our dogs without really actually doing very much at all other than what we should be doing in the first place. So making sure they're healthy, making sure they have a nice diet, making sure they have enough sleep, etc., etc. Active support is about actually putting in things in place to help our dogs feel better and actively making a point of doing so. Okay, so it is very slightly different, but what we want to do is we want to be able to provide them with support in the situation, because our dogs are going to bark. There's no two ways about it. But what we want to do is we want to be able to turn that training, that situation into a training opportunity. We want to understand why our dogs are barking and what we can do about it there and then in order to help them in that moment. So if the triggers have become a training opportunity, if our dog is barking, it means he's not ready for that level of stimulus yet. So it may be that he's too close to that other dog. It may be that there's too much noise going on. It may be that his bucket is full. So create distance and just take it as information that you need to proof your training a little bit more, that you need to practice helping your dog with that stimulus at a lower level of distraction, perhaps. You know, if he's barking at a dog because they're too close, then maybe you need to practice a little bit further away for a bit longer before you get to any closer to dogs. Calmly reward with jackpots if they get things right. So if your dog is barking at, I don't know, a car, and you know, you're going to reward them anyway because of the presence of the trigger. But say if the car goes past, and they usually bark at cars, but at this time, for whatever reason, they didn't do it, that dog needs to be jackpotted treats. They need to be told how clever they are. But the thing is, you have to do it very carefully. You do not want to be overexcited because you don't want to add arousal to an already high arousal situation. But the reward must be worth the effort. So you want to maybe calmly give them something really good, like chicken, or, you know, something really nice. You know, not be jumping around and go, oh, you're such a good dog, blah, 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 blah. Literally just make it the nicest reward, but calmly. Okay, we never want to be adding arousal to a high arousal situation. So when we're actively giving support, some of that would involve management. Now, with management, we need to think ahead so that when it comes to being in the situation, we're already set up. There's no point being in a situation already where your dog is going crazy and then you've got to fumble around looking for the lead. You need to have that lead ready and waiting, okay? So what management might you need in any situation? Think ahead to how you're going to react in future. If you have that dog coming towards you, if you have that car coming towards you, if the postman's at the door, you know, if there's the dog in next door's garden running up and down the fence, what management do you need in place so you can just grab hold of it quickly or put the dog somewhere quickly? What would make your training more convenient? So some of the examples might be having treats already chopped up in the fridge. It might be having little pots of treats dotted around the house so that you can reach them nice and easily. It might be having leads hung up by your doors rather than in a box somewhere. Yeah, whatever you need to do to make management much quicker and easier is going to make it more effective. So your car crate, if you use a car crate for your, you know, and your dog barks out the windows, cover that before you set off. Put a film on your window so that the film's already there. They don't need to bark out the window because they can't see out of the window. The light still comes through, but they can't see, so you've already covered it up. Obviously, you need a fence around your garden. That's kind of standard with a dog. I would suggest using a wooden fence or even a chicken wire fence if you have to, but never, ever, ever an electric fence because that can actually make problems worse. Using stair gates, oh my gosh, the amount of time I spend in people's houses trying to get out of their stair gates is like, it's ridiculous. So if you're going to have stair gates, they're designed for us to find difficult to get out of. So practice using them. When you install them, practice using them so it becomes like a muscle memory, so that you can just open them really quickly and easily, so that you don't find yourself fiddling with the stair gate hanging onto a barking dog. Okay. Often find a bum bag of treats is really, really useful because then I've always got something on hand to reward my dog when I want to. And I tend to keep treats with me just in case, rather than during active training. I actually have treats with me all the time. Now, You might think the dog's just going to follow you around and wait for the treats and, you know, only do anything when you've got treats, etc. And to start with, they may well follow you around while you're wearing your bum bag, but after a little while, they kind of get used to you wearing it. Okay, they don't sit outside the fridge and just sit there and dribble at it all day in, day out, even though they know there's food in there. And it works the same way with your bum bag. Okay, the more you wear it, the less they're going to follow you around eventually. A long line is always useful. So I keep one in the car. I have one in the house as well for whenever we go anywhere. And I keep it in a bag, because then if I want to go out, say to the park or anything like that, I just have to grab the bag and go. I don't have to go around looking for it. So we keep leads by the front and back door, because if somebody we don't know turns up at the door, or if the dog's likely to go running off out, for example, today's very windy. Now, Twyla loves it when it was windy because there's lots of leaves blowing around. So she's highly likely to go running out after the leaves. So if we keep a lead by the front door, I don't have to go and find a lead before I can open it. Pots of treats, as I say, easy to reach places. So you're always ready to mark and reward. And the most important thing is to train while you're out of the situation and prove your training and setups. Now, by training, I don't mean sit down, stay, nag. What I do mean is if you are training your dog to resolve a problem that they have with a trigger, you actually need to put in the time to do that. You cannot just put 10 minutes of expecting, you know, doing pattern games and engage, disengage with your dog, and then expect them to be able to cope when they next bump into the German Shepherd that they always hated in the park. You know, you really need to put the time in and the effort in order to have your training set so that when an opportunity to use it comes along, you are ready. Okay, and also your dog will be ready as well. So with that in mind, I want you to think about walking strategies for your dog, because as we said before, walks can be actually really triggering for dogs when they have a lot of problems with triggers. If you imagine, say, I mean, Twyla, she doesn't get upset by leaves, she gets overexcited by them. So that still counts as a trigger. Okay, so on a windy day like today, I'm not going to bother taking her out. But if I was going to have to, then I know that she would be even more highly aroused and more bouncy than she already is. And she would, chances are, bark more as a result. So with that in mind, you know, dogs that actually are worried about things like cars, other dogs, etc., going on walks, you know, that's not necessarily the way to help keep them calm. And a highly aroused dog is more likely to be barky than a calm dog. Okay, we need to think about calmness in as many situations as possible in order to keep that bucket a little bit empty. Okay, as long as we can keep that bucket empty, our dogs aren't going to be losing their mind barking at everything all the time, and then they're able to learn. So with all that in mind, employ walk-in strategies for your dog so that when you do have to take them out, you want to help them feel safe and relaxed. So hopefully this video will work. We shall see. I would just have to double check on my phone that I've got plugged in.
Walking skills, creating space and the U-turn. Wow, he looks like an angry little dog. We've all been here, right? With our dog hanging off the end of his lead, either wanting to go play or behaving as if he wants to start a fight. Why is it they always seem to pick the biggest dog in the park to pick on too? It's so embarrassing. All you want is just to enjoy a nice walk, but instead the walk leads to a whole pile of more fear and more embarrassing behaviour. So, why does your dog do it? Well, usually they either are frustrated because they want to go and see the trigger, or they're aggressing because they're not very happy about seeing the trigger. Whether your dog is frustrated or aggressing, the answer is obviously not going to be to allow your dog to go and investigate closer. This will either reward your playful dog for their persistence, and they'll teach them that it's a really good idea just to try that little bit harder and make a fuss that little bit more next time, and eventually you will give in, or it will end in a fight between possibly your dog and another dog, or it might end up with your dog biting someone or chasing a cat or doing something you really don't want them to do. The good news is most of this can be avoided by doing a couple of simple things. First, you're going to map your route. By map your route, what I want you to do is I want you to avoid all narrow paths, tunnels and alleyways, and preferably stay places where you can always cross a road. Your dog, when they are walking head on towards something that they are worried about, that can be seen as very aggressive, especially if that thing that's walking towards them is another dog. They much prefer to be able to walk around in a curving motion, which is much better manners in the doggy world. Also, dogs tend to react when they're a little bit too close to a trigger, so we need to create space. Yeah. You'll find often that if a trigger is coming towards your dog, you will see them start to tense up before they start to react. And it's at this point you know that they are too close and you need to get away. So for this reason, you're not going to walk your dog along little paths anymore. Anywhere that resembles little tunnels or anywhere that you can't get out of, they're off limits. Instead, you're going to choose routes that are nice and open and have a road that you can cross at all times. You'll be looking for a place where you can always curve around an oncoming trigger. With reactive dogs, whether they be frustrated dogs or aggressive dogs or fearful dogs or any other kind of reactivity, distance is always your friend. So the more distance you can make, the better. If your dog learns that you're going to keep them safe by providing distance from their trigger, over time they'll begin to feel much less threatened by the trigger and walks will become more pleasant. Similarly, if they want to play and get frustrated because they're going too close to a trigger and they want to play with it and they can't get to it and they're not allowed, increasing the distance before they get to that point of frustration will make the experience so much nicer for your dog. You should always aim to be increasing distance as soon as there is a trigger in the vicinity. Don't wait until the dog's already reactive before you cross the road. And always, always, always give them a treat and tell them how good they are once you've passed that trigger. Of course, there will always be times when you get caught out. So train a U-turn long in advance just in case. You want to practice it as often as you can. You don't want the U-turn to be a cue for your dog to worry or to think every time we do this it means something horrible is coming. You want it just to be almost like when you're driving and you're going along and you don't tend to think about it, you just go through the actions, and you want your dogs to just go through the actions as well. You want it ingrained in muscle memory. To train it, you're going to first practice in your living room, then you're going to practice in your garden, then you're going to practice on the road outside your home, and then you're going to build up to distracting places. And I often say, if you practice first of all by, instead of turning away from triggers, turn away from things like lampposts and, random things in your garden like pots and things like that. Just practice the actual movement of turning away rather than getting away from a trigger. You really, really, really want it to be just ingrained in your muscle memory, so as soon as your hand slides down the lead, you and the dog are already turning. So to train a U-turn, you would do this. Dog on one side, hand on the other, okay? Hand. Walking along. Something you want to stand on, like hand down the lead. Same way. Okay. Okay, that one more time. Yeah. Right. So that was, you slide your hand down the lead towards the dog, preferably your dog be wearing a harness rather than a collar. You turn the dog, As you're walking away, you feed. Now, the reason you slide your hand is because that becomes a cue to the dog that you're going to move. That it tells them that what's going to happen next is that you're going to turn them around and we're going to start walking the opposite direction. The reason you move your hand down the lead is because you've got greater control at the dog end than you have hanging on the end of the lead. Now, a dog hanging on the end of the lead, jumping around and barking, and that's not a very pleasant experience. Whereas if you just gently slide your hand down the lead and then guide them off up the road, that's going to be a lot more pleasant for both of you. And of course, you want to feed as you're going. You want the dog to be rewarded for walking away nicely, or even if they don't walk away that nicely, you just want them to feel like they've got something out of the situation. So I would like to just watch this video again one more time, just so that you definitely know what you're doing. Look on one side, and on the other. Okay. Walking along. Something you want to down, like hand down the knee. One way. Yeah. Now, as previously said, you want to be doing this preferably before your dog is reacting to anything. The sooner you can move them away, the better, really, the more pleasant it is for both of you, and the better practice you get at not reacting to things too. Just for one last go. So, don't forget, what you practice, you get good at. So I want you to practice doing the U-turns. I want you to practice it up and down your garden. I want you to do it around your living room, in your kitchen, up and down the street, outside. You want to get really, really good at it so that as soon as a trigger comes along, it's almost like an automatic reaction. Okay, now creating space and learning a U-turn is going to make your walks so much easier and so much nicer for you. There are other things as well that we can do to make, loose leash walking possible and that kind of thing. But those two things to start with are really important basic foundation skills for dog walking. And as I say, what you practice, you get good at. So get practicing. Walking skills. Creating.
So I've got to try and work out how to move this on now. Hang on. We'll cheat and do it this way. There we go. Right, so we have now learned about active support, what we can do in the situation with our dogs. We can create a U-turn. We know about creating space from the trigger. We know about mapping our routes when we're walking to avoid coming into triggers head on. Okay, we've learned about management and thinking ahead so that when we have to deal with a situation, we're already prepared. I must apologise for my speech impediment. It is playing me up today. So that is your support in the situation. We are going to have a 5-10 minute break just where you can go and practice doing U-turns with your dog. If you want to show us on the video, that'd be great, but if you don't want to, then that's also fine. And I will be back to continue the next part in 10 minutes. So we'll say 2:25. Okay. And we're back. So hopefully you've all enjoyed practicing your U-turns, and if you need any help with that, obviously you can get hold of me. But it's a fairly simple thing to do, really. Just sliding your hand down the lead and then turning your dog away from the triggers. Now, the best time I find to do this is before your dog started reacting. So as soon as they've laid eyes on a trigger, you can literally just turn them around and gently walk off in the opposite direction. Do practice it. I mean, one of the things I try and do is when I'm walking my dog, I do it around corners so that it becomes just a way of me turning the dog around the corner. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean anything while we're going along, because one thing we have to be very careful of is giving our dogs cues that something bad's about to happen. What we want to do is anything that we use to do, like, you know, with management of barking like this, we want to be using in other situations too, like totally normal, happy situations, so that they don't necessarily think every time you slide your hand down the lead, something bad's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, practice it and practice it and practice it. And you want to be thinking of it in terms of almost like driving your car, where when you first started doing it, you had to really concentrate on doing it and remembering what to do and where to put your hands and where to go. And, you know, but after a little while, it just becomes, you know, you just do it without even thinking. And that's what you want to be doing with this, with U-turns with your dog. Okay, so that's that. So now we're going to do some training for in the situation. Now, support and training are kind of two different things. Support is something that you do for your dog. Training is something you're going to teach your dog. Okay, so they are two slightly different things, and training is obviously a lot more active still. Okay, I'm just going to check I'm recording this. I hope I am. Yes, I am. Right. Okay, so powering up a marker. This is your next little video. The first thing we need is a marker when we are training our dogs. Now, without a marker, we can't pinpoint the exact moment our dog's doing something we want them to do. So we use a marker to tell them what they're being rewarded for effectively. Okay, so I will just play this for you.
Powering up a marker. Today we're going to talk about markers. So what is a marker? A marker is simply a tool that we use to tell the dog the exact point when they get something right. The dog learns the marker means a reward will follow, and so this speeds up the training as they try to repeat the action that caused the marker to appear. Why do we need to power up a marker? Well, dogs are not born speaking human, although they can learn what some of our words mean, especially words that mean good or bad news for them. We need to teach them that their marker is good news. We do this by powering it up. I will show you how to do this in a video after this presentation. We want them to love their marker, as it is a predictor of a reward coming their way, so we can use it to our advantage while training them. For example, imagine we're at the side of the road and you ask your dog to sit because of the heavy traffic. Your dog sits. You fumble around in your pocket and you can't find the treats, so you fumble around in another pocket. You find the treats and fiddle about opening the packet. But by this time, the dog's now up again and sniffing at a lamppost, so what do? Do you give the dog a treat or not? After all, he did a good sit, but now if you reward him, you'll be rewarding him for sniffing a lamppost, which is not exactly what we wanted. So, we use the marker to pinpoint the moment the dog sits, and so the dog will know that a reward is coming for their sit. Markers come with rules. A marker can be anything that is convenient to you and easy for your dog to understand. However, it must be something that you don't use in conversation or as an action all the time, every day. We want this to not be confusing for your dog. It must be clearly convenient to you and clear for your dog to understand. A marker must only be used for rewarding your dog, so never use it before a punishment or reversive. As a fun not fear method follower, you will never be punishing anyway. We don't believe in punishing, we're reward-based trainers. A reward always follows a marker, even if the marker was given by accident. Even if that reward is simply an affectionate fuss, a reward must follow a marker. If you sit on the clicker or if you say good and your dog comes over expecting a treat, then you should give that treat, because otherwise that takes power away from your marker, and your marker must always stay powered up. rewards should you choose? Well, a reward is anything your dog likes, but some rewards are better than others. The dog will decide what is rewarding. Most dogs like food or treat rewards. Treats that you choose should be easily broken into bits and chewed up, and super tasty. Many dogs will go crazy for cheese or chicken or small pieces of chopped up sausage. These are known as high value treats. High value treats are for when you're first training a new behaviour and you want your dog to be super interested in what you're doing. Mid value treats would be maybe shop bought dog treats, which are still quite tasty, but not quite so tasty as cheese or chicken, or what I call fridge kibble. Now, fridge kibble is when you take some of your dog's usual dinner and you wrap it up in a sandwich bag and you put it in the fridge with something really smelly like parmesan or salami. And then what you do is you leave it in the fridge overnight, so in the morning you have kibble that smells of treats. Then, of course, there are just plain bits of kibble. A reward, but not as enticing as high or mid-value treats. So this would be given perhaps if your dog already knows the things you're teaching them, but you still want to give them a reward, or maybe if you are using their dinner instead of treats because you don't want them to get fat. There are lots of reasons why you could just be using kibble, just because it's there and it's handy, but for training new things, I would go for high value treats. Other rewards, because not all dogs are foodie, can be, but not limited to, a roll of the ball, a quick game of tuggy, a nice fuss if your dog likes fuss, being allowed to go sniff, or even simply verbal praise. Whatever your dog really enjoys is a reward that can be used. When your dog is behaving as you want them to, you should always reward them. After all, we want training for them to be fun for them too. There are several types of marker. Markers, as I say, are anything your dog can pick out easily and understand. Common markers are verbal ones like good, nice, super dog, or yes, which are my favourites, or a clicker. Or even for some dogs, you can teach them a hand sign. Now, this is very useful to teach a dog anyway, because any dog that loses their hearing, if they already know a little bits of sign language, then it saves you having to teach them. But of course, a deaf dog will need teaching too, so hand sign languages are all hand sign signals and markers are always really, really good to teach. I use all of them interchangeably because Moo is well rehearsed in many markers, but for the purpose of the lesson, I will show you how to use a clicker, a sign, and how to use a marker word. But then, be warned, I will use them interchangeably through the rest of the course. You should stick with whatever marker you choose to use for now, simply because we don't want to confuse your dog. Okay? So, let's begin.
Let's just come out of there. Right, so I actually lied slightly at the end of that presentation. That was a presentation I took from something else, and I'm not going to be teaching you all about hand signals and stuff today. However, I think clickers and, just thinking of a word and using that one word as your marker is really, really useful for your dog. So the way you would actually teach your dog to recognize their marker is simply by giving them the marker and then immediately following it up with a treat or a reward. And you give them the marker and then you give them the reward, and then you give them the marker and then you give them the reward, and then you keep going until every time your dog hears that marker, he then looks for his reward. And then what you want to start doing at that point is you give them the marker and then maybe count a second or two before giving them the reward, because then that will give you fumbling time at the side of the road, or it'll give you time to rummage through the packet, or so your dog doesn't start to lose interest, because sometimes you want to be able to give your dog a marker and it might take you a second to get your bum bag undone, or that kind of thing. So you don't want them to lose interest. You want them to realize that the marker means that there is a reward coming, okay? And that sometimes it does take a few seconds, because the last thing you want, especially with a barky dog, is for them to then start demand barking for their rewards, okay? So if you reward that, if you give them the marker and then reward them, and then gradually stretch it out sort of between 2 to 5 seconds, like between the reward, the marker and the reward, you will find that actually that's quite a useful skill for your dog to have, just that little bit of patience. Okay, so when we're training our dogs, and we're training them for things we don't necessarily want them, we want them to not do, so we don't necessarily want them to bark, etc., etc. It's really, really tempting to say no. Now, when we say no to our dogs, what does it actually mean? Okay, so let me just pop this on the proper screen again. There we go, that's better. Right, so when we say no to our dogs, what does it actually mean? You see, you can say, there we go. Right, you can say no. And if I say no to you now, Emma, are you still there? Because if you are, that'd be really handy if I could just unmute you for a moment. No. Okay, right. So what I was going to say is I was just going to perform a little experiment with Emma actually to see how long it would take for me saying no before the right action was performed. But if you imagine if I was to sit my son down and I wanted him to perform a certain action. Hold on, I've got a chat here. What's this? Oh, hello, Emma. There you are. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. So I was just going to perform a little experiment with you. Okay.
Yep.
So I am going to say no, right? And you are going to have to try and guess what I want. Okay. So when we're saying, the reason is when we're saying no to our dogs, right, we automatically assume that we know what they want, they know what we want instead, and they don't necessarily. Okay, so if I say no to you now, Emma, what does that mean?
I don't know. It could be anything.
Okay, so now I'm going to say no again. What do I want you to do?
Maybe stop what I'm doing, but
But then if I ask you to stop what you're doing, what does that, you see, I say your dog's barking out the window, right? And I say no. To the dog, that might mean stop what you're doing, but then it doesn't tell them what to do next. So if I say no and they stop barking, does that then mean now bark a bit louder? Does that then mean now run around a little bit and bark? Does it mean go and answer the door and bark? What does the no actually mean? Okay, so if I say no to you now, Emma, what do I mean?
you still, I could interpret it completely different from what you.
So if I was to give you an actual instruction instead of no, would you find that easier to follow?
Yes. Always.
Okay, so instead of saying no until you get it right, I'm just going to give you the one instruction. Okay, can you mute yourself again?
Trying.
There you go. You see, and you've done it the very first time without me having to say no lots of times, without me getting frustrated because you don't understand what I want. And also, you were not frustrated at me saying no, 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 and not knowing what it is that I want from you. Okay. So when we say no, I mean, some people say you should never say no to your dogs. And for me, the jury is out a little bit on that one. I'm definitely not the sort of person that likes screaming and shouting no and telling them off and punishments and blah, 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 because that's not a good thing. But I think no, sometimes it has a place as an interrupter. But the thing is, because we use it in so many negative situations, it can become quite a negative word with a lot of negative connotations. So what we like to do is train something called an interrupter cue. Now, if you imagine you wanted to, so when you said, Emma, that no means stop what you're doing, that's what an interrupter cue will do. Okay, but an interrupter cue will not have all the negative connotations that saying no will have, because even when we say, you know, just in general conversation, no is a negative noise. It's a negative thing. It's something that we don't necessarily want to hear. It's not usually followed by anything good. Whereas an interrupter cue, we can make it so it's always followed by something good. Now, a lot of us will actually use an interrupter cue purely naturally by accident, right? So a lot of us might go, what's this? When we're calling our dogs, if we want to get their attention and they're off chasing something extremely exciting and we go, what's this? They turn around, they come running towards us expecting something nice. Yeah. So what's this has become an interrupter cue. Another example of a good interrupter cue would be a squeaky toy. Now, I quite often save the squeakers out of toys because A, Twyla just squeaks them constantly and drives me up the wall with them. But B, if I'm in the park and she's up to no good, or what I deem as no good, she thinks it's great. If I squeak a squeaker at her, she comes straight back. So to her, a squeaker means come here and get something nice. For me, it means that she's going to stop doing whatever it is she's doing without me having to tell her off, or without me having to get cross, or me having to say no, or do any of those things that people used to do in the past. Instead, we can just interrupt that behavior with an interrupter cue. Okay, so a squeaker is a really good one. Like I say, no is not so good. People tend to do it like naturally, just saying no to things, but you know, things like a squeaker or something with a positive ending is usually better. Okay, so what else can we do? We can make kissy noises. We can, some people pat their legs, or some people clap their hands, or you know, like there's all sorts of different noises and things that we can do. But what we have to do is we have to teach the dog that it means that come back and get something nice. So in much the same way that we often naturally go, what's this? And the dog comes back and gets something nice, we can teach any other interrupter cue exactly the same way. Okay, so an interrupter cue is a really, really good thing to teach the dog. Now, I did put a break in here. I'm not sure if we're going to need a break because we've only just had one, to be honest. But have you, if you've got any questions, Emma, about an interrupter cue, now's a good time to ask them. You can unmute yourself if you want to. If not, then I am going to move on to the next bit of training. Here we go. Is a whistle okay to use? So yes, I mean, we use a whistle as a recall. An interrupter cue can be a form of recall for sure. If it's something that the dog associates with something nice and it means that they're going to come away from whatever it is they're doing and come to you, then yeah, absolutely, you can use that. I mean, so a lot of interrupter cues do just involve training a type of recall, you know, or it's a lot easier to train a dog to want to come back to you and instantly stop what they're doing than it is to try and get them to figure out to not do everything in every situation. You know, if every situation involves that here's the noise, comes back, gets something nice, then it works both ways. So yeah, absolutely, a whistle is okay to use. I was actually reading, I didn't know this until recently, but there are different types of whistle for different types of dog. And I never even knew that, but apparently there's different pitches that you can get for Acme whistles that are like for Labradors or for Springers, and because they have different shaped ears, so they hear things more comfortably. And I never knew that till the other day, so that's just an interesting side note for you. Right, so now that we can interrupt them from doing what we don't want to do, what do we want them to do instead? Okay, so the interrupter cue will bring them back towards us. You know, we can say, what's this? We can blow a whistle, we can squeak a toy at them, we can give them an interrupter cue word. They come back towards us, they get the treat. Now what's to stop them going running off and doing the thing that we didn't want them to do again? So we need to give them a job to do. So rather than running straight back to the window to bark at it, hello Twyla, how about we teach them to do touch cues? So instead of running back to the window, they then start touching our hand. How about we teach them to sit on a mat when the door goes? If they're running off and they're barking at the door and we want them to come away from the door, so we interrupt them, we give them their interrupter cue, and then we get them to sit on a mat possibly. Okay, so if they're sitting on a mat, then they're not jumping around at the door. Obviously, it's something that needs to be trained up, but it's just an idea. Quite often when dogs are excited to see people and they're barking because they're excited, I like to train them to pick up a toy, because if they have a toy in their mouth, they're much less likely to be barking. So if you can interrupt the barking and then get them to go and get a toy, then you know you're winning. Going to the kitchen or another safe place is another good one. So you could interrupt the barking and then direct them somewhere where they're not going to feel like they need to bark. If you're out and about and they're barking on the end of the lead and there's a trigger or something like that coming towards you, what you can do is you can interrupt that barking and play a pattern game. Now I'm going to go through some pattern games with you very shortly, but yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do that you need to actively teach them after you've stopped the barking. Okay, so hang on, there we go. So like I say, what we need to do is you need to get the barking, you need to interrupt the barking, and then you need to get them to do something else instead. Okay, the more they practice carrying on barking, the better they're going to get at barking. So the more they practice carrying on doing something else instead, the better they're going to get at that. Now, if you want any ideas on how to train any different jobs to do, please do get in touch and I will teach you those. The easiest ones for me are things like sitting on a mat when the door goes, because you can have the mat exactly beside the door. So all you do is you have the dog sit before you open it, and the dog will start to sit automatically on the mat while you're opening the door, and you just start moving the mat away from the door. And all these things, you have to practice them and practice them and practice them. And what you want to do is you want to set up situations with your friends, with your teenagers, with your partner, so that your dog can hear things like the door knocking, or they can hear things like rustling outside, or they can hear whatever, or perhaps your friend walking towards them with their dog in the park, etc., etc. Set up situations so that that you can put that training in a controlled way, so that your dog is then able to practice these things, so that when it comes to actually being faced with their trigger in real life, you've already practiced your response, you've practiced the interruption, you've practiced the alternative thing that you want them to do instead. So they're going to have a much better chance of being successful at that. And having a job to do when faced with a trigger is going to give your dog a real good confidence boost, because it's going to give them a framework within which to work. So instead of them not knowing what to do, so they just run around and bark, they go, right, this happened, so now I have to go and do this. And then that makes them feel better. It makes them feel more in control of the trigger, which makes them less likely to bark at it in the first place. Okay. If they're in control of something, they're not so likely to be afraid of it or worried about it that they have to bark at it. And also that they then start to realize that that trigger becomes a cue to be interrupted, becomes a cue to do something else, becomes a cue for rewards. So it sets up a chain of trigger, reward. Yeah. So pattern games, they're mostly talked about by a lady called Leslie McDevitt. And they are kind of designed mostly for reactive dogs, mostly for dogs that struggle around triggers, that are very hyper aroused, that need help for things to do in the moment. And the idea behind them is they're very, very simple. They're the most simplest things so that you can practice doing them, anyone can do them. And when your dog is particularly stressed, they've still got a good chance of being able to do these things. Now, if you imagine if a dog is particularly stressed in the face of a trigger and they're barking and barking and barking, it's going to be really hard for them to be able to concentrate on doing anything that's difficult. It's going to be hard for them to break their attention away from the barking and the reacting to something that's going to be really sort of taxing on their brains. They're just not going to be able to do it. So it has to be something that's really super simple and really super rewarding. So then your dog can do it in the moment. It gives your dog a framework in which to make better choices. So if they know every time a dog comes towards them, you're going to keep them safe because you're going to cross the road like we discussed in the video previously, but you're also then going to start doing the up-down game, for example, with them, then they know that this is what happens from now on. They start to feel more confident knowing that the other dog is going to pass by them, because that's what always happens. They're going to get all these treats and play this little game with you, and then they're going to be told how good they are, and then they're going to go walking off. So it gives them a framework in which to work, because then if they know what's coming next, if they know how things are going to go, they don't necessarily need to worry as much, and they don't need to react as much. So some of the pattern games give you an easy way to move your dog away from situations they can't handle, and they turn the situation into training opportunities. Now, two of the pattern games in particular involve teaching your dog to be able to go past or to disengage from a trigger. So in rewarding them for doing that, they're going to get better at doing that. And a dog that is disengaged from their trigger isn't one that's barking at them. Okay. So one of my favorite things to teach, some people call it the look at that game, some people call it the engage disengage game. And the only sort of real massive difference about those two things is with the look at that game is you actually put it on cue so that you tell your dog to look at the thing, and your dog looks at the thing and then it gets marked and rewarded. You can do that. It does teach your dog, you know, that when you say look at that, it can give them a warning that something's coming. So if you know there's a dog coming around the corner, for example, you can give them the heads up. But the engage disengage game is, you know, it's fairly standard behavior modification practice actually. But if you have a dog who's very, very reactive and they are finding even across a field that they're too close and they're barking, then you really need to get in touch with a behaviorist, okay? And I can help you with that. If the dog barks or if they are, you know, looking fearful or worried in any way, then they're too close to the distraction. For this game to work, they have to be far enough away that they feel quite relaxed while they're doing it. So the engage disengage game goes a little bit like this. You mark and reward as soon as the dog indicates or looks at the distraction. So by indicates, I mean they flick their ears in that direction. They might sort of like motion to you that they've seen that thing without directly looking at it. You know, you can usually tell when your dog's sort of like twitching their head in a certain direction that what they're sort of indicating at. So they don't necessarily have to fully look at the thing, they can just indicate at the thing. Okay, so and as soon as they do that, as soon as they either indicate or their eyes cross the thing, you're going to mark and reward. So when I say mark, I mean use your marker that you've trained up already. And you repeat that lots and lots of times. Then what you want to do is to see if your dog has associated looking at the trigger or indicating the trigger with a reward. Wait a few seconds and then the dog will look at the trigger and then possibly look back to you to see where his reward is. So if he doesn't do that, you go back to step one and you do that a few more times. And if he does look back to you and go, oh, wait, where's my reward? Then you go to step three. Step three, you mark and reward when the dog looks at the distraction and looks back to you. So the rewarding point is when they've looked already and now they're looking at you again. So you've rewarded them initially for looking at the thing. Now you're rewarding them for looking away from the thing again. Yeah, and you repeat that lots and lots and lots. And after a while, that dog learns that that thing in the distance, if they indicate towards it, they're going to get rewards. And at that point, they're going to stop feeling quite as worried about that dog or that trigger. So what you do then is you increase your criteria very, very slightly. You can either reduce the distance by 1 meter or ½ meter, or you can add in a bit of extra distraction. So it might be that if you've got a dog across a field, you might have a dog and some children across the field, or a dog and 2 owners instead of 1 across the field. You just add in a little bit extra, or you might come a little bit meter closer to them perhaps. Again, if your dog starts barking, you're just too close. So you just use that as information. Your dog's not ready for that level yet, and you increase your distance again. Okay, so one of the ways I often describe how this works in humans is I talk about it in terms of spiders. Now, if you imagine that triggers are spiders and you don't like spiders, or at least most people don't like spiders. When your dog's out and about in the world, there's lots of triggers around. So it's a bit like being in a room full of spiders. If you're in a room full of spiders, you cannot necessarily cope with them. They're all wiggling around and doing whatever and looking particularly horrid. And it doesn't matter what you do. If there's too many of them, you're too close to them, you're not going to be able to learn to like them very much. But if we just isolate one of those spiders or one trigger, and we put it at such a distance that you're comfortable with it. So we put that one spider right at the end of the garden, and then we reward you for just looking at it or telling me it's there. So every time you look at it, I'll give you a £5. After a little while, that spider right at the end of the garden, it isn't doing anything. You don't have to interact with it. You don't have to, go near it, anything like that. But every time you look in that direction, you get a £5. You're going to start feeling a bit better about that spider. And then, you know, you might be able to look at it and then look back to me and say, well, I looked at it, where's my fibre? Yeah. So at that point, you know, you're starting to feel a bit better about that spider. You don't necessarily want to go and pick it up and make best friends with it, but it's not as scary as being in a whole room full of spiders. So you're learning how to cope with just that one spider. And then you can increase the criteria very slowly. So you can either go 2 steps closer or 1 step closer to the spider, or maybe add in a bit of extra distraction, like maybe the spider's now got a web. Yeah. And if you find that you can't cope and you're really, really frightened, all you've got to do is just move away again a little bit, you know. And in doing it this way, after a while, with all these fibers that you get every time you go near the spider, you're going to start feeling, actually, you know, that spider's not too bad. I don't have to go near it. I don't have to interact with it. I don't have to pick it up or touch it or pet it or anything else like that. It's just there. It's not doing anything, but I get rewards for it being there. Yeah. So you're going to start to feel a bit better about that spider. And this is what we want our dogs to feel about their triggers. We want to isolate them so that they're at a level the dog can handle. And then we want to teach them that actually the trigger at that level is actually quite a good news thing for you. It's quite good. You're going to get rewards. Yeah. So that whole process is called desensitization and counter conditioning, which is a really long-winded way of saying changing how somebody feels about something. Okay, so I'm just checking I'm recording all this. But yeah, so all we want to do, and this is our resolve method. So when we were talking about rethink and resolve, hi Twyla, and resolve, right, and remove, this is resolve. This is changing how the dog feels about the thing. So if you can't remove the thing and you can't just manage your way out of that situation, you can't rethink the thing, then you need to resolve the thing. And this is one of the ways you do it. Okay, so the engage disengage game is really, really useful. Now, the next video you're going to see is one of my Moo, bless his little heart. He's actually not with us anymore. So this is quite, this is quite nice for me to be able to see him too. He actually passed away a few months back after swallowing a grass seed, and it got into his tongue, and yeah, it was not very nice. But he was really, really good at the engage disengage game. When he first came to me, he had so many triggers. He had a lot of problems with illness and allergies and intolerances, and he is actually the reason I got into behaviour in the first place. And this is why I deal with this kind of business, is because through him I learned a lot, and then I went on and learned to do it all properly through things like the ISCP, etc., etc. But the engage disengage game was just one thing that actually changed his life, and it's so simple. But so I'm going to show you a video of him and some triggers that he had. One of his triggers was dogs on TV, and I know that one of the people who signed up for this webinar said that one of their triggers was dogs on TV. So I'm just going to show you how he deals with it. Now, he doesn't bark as much as he could do, simply because he'd already been trained not to. But you will still see him doing the odd little woofs here and there. You know, I thought I'd leave those in just so you actually, you can see. But you can see how much how easy it actually is to train it to a dog that's struggling. And the thing is, if you use something like the TV as one of your starter triggers to resolve, because you can control what's on your TV, you can look up dogs on YouTube, for example, or whatever it is your dog doesn't like to see on TV, and you can control how long that's on the TV for. So you can actually set it up so that you can set up training sessions to do this. So this is a very useful video for quite a few of you. Okay. So here we go.
Moo performing the engage-disengage game with dogs on TV as a trigger. Moo is well rehearsed in this game around all kinds of triggers. Your dog will bark at first, reward them regardless. We reward for the trigger, not the behaviour. Here we've set up dogs on TV, which used to be a trigger for Moo to bark at, so we can show you how to play the look at that game or the engage-disengage game. Moo will get rewarded for just looking at the screen, no matter his behaviour. As soon as his eyes cross the screen, he's going to get marked with a good and rewarded with a treat. moved him here just so that you can see a little bit better. Once your dog understands the game and feels comfortable, we increase the criteria. Moo has to disengage and then look to me before he gets his treat. Just wait a few seconds and see if they look back to you of their own accord. If they do, then that's great. You can also point your fingers up to your eyes if they're looking back if you really want to refine where you want them to look. Good. Now take your dog to where they can see their trigger at a distance and where they're not reacting, and practice. If they bark, you may be too close, so just increase your distance. If they're very stressed, call it a day and give lots dogs a shout. Always remember, lots of short sessions of a few minutes are better than long intensive sessions. Moo.
I still can't work out how to put the videos off from here, so I'm just doing it the cheat way. Right, there we go. Right, so that was Moo. He was learning, he was doing the engage disengage game with dogs on the TV. Now, as I say, he was actually really quite well trained at that point. So although you could still see him having little woofs here and there, he was nowhere near as barky and reactive as he would have been, say, the year previous, or as many of your dogs will be. What I want you to remember is that all these things take a bit of practice, and in order to get to a stage where your dog isn't reacting, isn't barking, they actually have to practice and practice and practice, and you have to set up situations so that they can practice in order to be able to get to the level that Moo was at. Now, it should be said that he won't necessarily have to be fed that many treats all the time forevermore, because what happens is your dog stops caring about what's on the TV, they stop caring about that trigger as much, and then they stop noticing it as much. So when they stop noticing it as much, you can start then not having to give them as many rewards. Also, what you can do is you can start dropping the value of the rewards a little bit. So instead of giving ham or something really nice like I was giving Moo just there, you can then start giving them kibble or fridge kibble or something. So they're still getting a reward, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the most enticing reward in the world. Because they now have decided that actually that trigger is not that scary after all. Unless something terrible happens with that trigger, they're not going to be likely to be worried about it again if you stop giving as many treats. But not giving treats is a long way down the road, and to start with, you just want to concentrate on reducing the barking and reducing the reacting to that trigger. Now, I don't know if you noticed how quickly I was feeding Moo. Literally, you want to be that quick so you're catching them in time before they start barking, before they start worrying, before they start going into panicking. As soon as their eyes are crossing that trigger, then you should be rewarding them. Okay. And they, like I say, they will start to slow down, they will start to calm down eventually, but to start with, the whole point is literally just to get them to not bark, to get them to feel better. So the faster and more tempting the rewards are to start with, the better. Yeah, so I would really love to hear about any of you guys if you have done anything like this with your dogs. I'm going to stop for a little break in a minute now so that you can go and practice possibly. One of the ways you can practice with your dog, if you, because obviously you don't really want to be throwing them straight into working with triggers until you've got the mechanics in place, is you can start training them to look at, say, a plant pot or something completely ambiguous and non-scary. And all you're going to do is just train them to, you know, wave a teddy bear about, and every time they look at the teddy bear, they get reward. You know, just really sort of practice getting the movement in place of them looking and you marking and rewarding. And you have to mark the very instant that they cross eyes or indicate towards that trigger. Okay, now it's a really simple game and you go through quite a lot of food to start with, but it's one of the most effective tools that we have in our behaviour modification toolbox. And also, by changing how the dog feels about that trigger, they're much less likely to bark at it. They don't want it to go away, so they don't need to bark at it. Okay, so I am going to go and have a little break now. I'm going to put my dog out for a wee. She's being extremely good. I hope your dogs are being good too. And you guys can have a little practice at the engage disengage game. And if you're watching on replay, then you can pause it here, you can practice, and then you can come back for the next bit. All right, see you soon. Hi, so hopefully you're just having a little practice of the engage disengage game, probably with something that isn't too worrying for your dog, and let me know how that went. Okay, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. So next we're going to play something called the up down game. Now the up down game is to get your dog's attention in your direction for a few moments, just while there's a trigger or distraction in the environment. So it might be that there's something across the other side of the road and you'd rather your dog was looking at you than the thing across the road. Or it might be that, I don't know, perhaps there's a knock at the door and you'd rather your dog was paying attention to you than trying to get to the door, etc., etc. So in order to play the up down game, and it's called the up down game because that's the motion your dog's head's going to make. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. You place a piece of food between your legs, the dog will take it. You place another bit of food between your legs, your dog will take it. Now it's important to keep putting the food back in the same place as well. And then you wait for your dog to look up to you and say, oi, where's my next bit of food? And as they look at you, you're going to mark and reward with another bit of food between your feet. And your dog will take it. And you're going to wait for them to look at you. And when they do, you're going to mark and reward with another bit of food between your feet. And your dog will take it. And then you're going to wait, and so on and so on. Sometimes your dog might move away a little bit to start with until they get used to the idea of the game. That's okay. At the time when you're playing it, then it's just practice, it's just training. But eventually they'll start realizing, as soon as you put a bit of food between your legs, that you're playing this game, and they will be with you and they'll be giving you their full attention. Now you can do this with really, really high value food as well, just to make it even more enticing, to make you more interesting. So that space between your feet is going to become the most important space in the world if you've put the right treat in it. Okay, and if you keep doing it, dogs are they're creatures of efficiency. So what tends to happen is they work out the quickest way to get another treat. And if the quickest way to get another treat is to be still and look up and down between your feet and to your face, then that's what they're going to do. Okay, so, and that's one of the most easiest things you can teach them. And it's so easy just to do it in the moment when there's something going on that you're pretty sure your dog can cope with, but you just want to take their attention away from that thing a little bit. And by doing this, you're not necessarily avoiding them seeing the thing. You're not avoiding, you know, in order for a dog to get used to a distraction or to get used to a trigger, it has to know it's there, but it has to also know that it doesn't have to interact with that thing. It can be doing things with you instead. They can be doing things with you instead. Okay. So here is a video of Moo doing the up down game. I use a clicker for this. You can use your marker words if you like. Again, my dog was quite good at doing this. It might take a few minutes for your own dog to get to this level. And it doesn't matter what position the dog is playing in, as long as the head is going up and down. It's the up and down of the head looking between the floor and you that we're marking for. So I shall just come out of that again. Go back to here. Right, so we can put a break in here, so you can go and practice the up-down game. I get the feeling that you'll be very good at this one very quickly. It's very useful when you're on a lead, and like I say, you want to distract your dog from something, but you don't necessarily want to avoid them knowing that things in the environment. You just want them to have an alternative job to do instead. Okay, so you can have a break here, or we can carry on and we can go straight to 300 peck. Right, so 300 peck. Now, this is a loose lead walking game, and it's one of the easiest ones that I teach my clients. I teach this to puppies as well, generally because dogs who can walk on a loose lead are a lot calmer than the ones who pull. And as we've already discussed, calm dogs are less likely to be barking and going ahead. And that calmness carries over into every aspect of their life. It's not just while they're on the walk. If they wind themselves up completely on the walk, when they come home, they're still going to be wound up. If they're calm on the walk and they come home, they're still going to be that bit calmer, and vice versa. When they're calm at home, they're still going to be calmer on the walk. If they wind themselves up at home, they're going to be more wound up on the walk. And it's the wound up, anxious, highly aroused dogs are the ones that are more likely to bark. So 300 peck. 300 peck is a very simple loose leash walking game to play with your dog. It was named after an activity with pigeons where increasing a number of pecks on a bar were required for obtaining some food. Now, obviously we're not training pigeons, but this is a method that many trainers and behaviourists use for increasing duration of all sorts of behaviours, including things like a sit stay. You might count 1 second while they're sitting, 2 seconds while they're sitting, 3 seconds while they're sitting, etc., etc. You know, you can increase duration, you can increase all sorts of things gradually by doing 300 peck. Now, the idea is if your dog is finding something difficult, they're going to need more reinforcement for being able to do that thing. So if they're walking in an area, they're finding it very difficult to do loose lead, then they're going to need a lot more reinforcement. And therefore, this game is perfect for upping the amount of reinforcement when it's needed. Okay, so you take 1 step, then you feed. You want to feed straight to your knee or to your ankle, wherever it is you want the dog to aim for while you're walking. You don't want to be just tossing a bit of treat out to the side or wherever. You want the dog to be literally aiming to be beside you for this game, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that the dog has to heel beside you in a heeling position all the way through your walk. This is not that at all, but it just teaches the dog that it's a good idea to sort of hover near to your knee if they can help it, all right? So it's not a particularly strict heel work game. It's just literally teaches them to walk loosely beside you. So anyway, you take 1 step, then feed to the knee when the dog's beside you. Then you take 2 steps and you feed when the dog's beside you. Then you do 1, 2, 3 steps and then feed while the dog's beside you. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, then you feed while the dog's beside you. 5 steps, feed while the dog's beside you. If the dog pulls ahead, you're going to reset your step counting to 1 step, then feed, 2 steps, then feed, 3 steps. They're allowed to sniff. They're allowed to, well, they're allowed to do anything they want really, but you start back at 1. if they go ahead of you, if they're pulling, anything like that. The only time, you know, well, to be honest, the only time you really want to worry about it, not worry about it too much, is if you're crossing the road, because obviously you have to stop there. You have to make sure that, you know, your dog's safe. You can't just carry on doing your peck steps into the middle of the road. All right, but or any, you know, anywhere that's dangerous really. So as long as you're on the path and you're pecking away, then that's quite nice. So long before you reach 300 steps, because nobody ever counts to 300 steps, right? You have a loose lead walking dog. As always, you proof in many different places. So you start in your living room, then you go to the street outside or your garden, or, you know, all the easy places, maybe around the car park near your house, maybe then build up to a path with no grass verges, then a path with grass verges, then maybe go to the field, you know, maybe go to the park, build up really, really gradually. But the reason, like I say, the reason for teaching your dog to walk nicely on the lead is simply so that they can have a calmer experience, which then means that they're going to be calmer in general, which means less barking. Okay. So I think we have a video for you.
Hi, so today I'm going to teach you a loose leash walking game. It's great fun, really easy for your dog to learn. It's called 300 peck. It's so simple, you'll be doing it within minutes. Okay, so the idea behind it is really, really simple. Take one step, teach dog. Take 2 steps, teach dog. Take 3 steps, teach dog. Take 4 steps, teach dog. Go all the way up to 300 steps, and by that point, you've got a dog who is loosely walking. Now, if the dog pulls ahead, you stop, you wait for them to come back, and you start again at 1. If the dog wants to stop and sniff, then you let them sniff for as long as they like, and then you start again at 1. It's the most easiest way in the world to teach your dog to loosely walk. You can use their dinner, you can use treats, you can use anything that you like. Start in the garden where it's nice and easy, where they can learn, or maybe even in your living room if the garden is a very distracting environment. Then go from that to the path outside your house, then possibly a little way up the road, you know, around the corner, and then maybe build up more exciting places like the park, or, you know, anywhere that your dog finds difficult. But for now, do it in a nice easy place and practice just a couple of minutes a day, every day, and you will soon have your dog loosely walking like a pro.
It's important to point out that you can take steps in different directions. You shouldn't keep going in the same direction all the time. A dog that doesn't know which direction to pull you in can't pull you to get there. Right, so I'll get the hang of this one day, won't I? Where are we? Right, so the last and final game I was going to teach you is the 1, 2, 3 game. Now, I haven't actually got a video to go with this, and my dog has actually passed out asleep, so I'm not going to show you because, you know, a 12-month-old Springer dog needs her sleep. So, but I will describe it to you. The 1, 2, 3 game. First of all, you want to teach your dog that the word 3 is a cue that a reward is coming. Okay, so you say 3, reward the dog. 3, reward the dog. 3, reward the dog. And you literally want to do it 3, reward. 3, reward. 3, reward. Then Once your dog thinks all their birthdays have come at once, you're going to say 2, 3 and reward the dog. You're going to say 2, 3 and then you reward the dog. And you're going to say 2, 3 and reward the dog. Now I actually want you counting out loud while you're doing this as well, because the dog actually has to hear the words 2, 3 and then realize that the treat is coming on 3. Okay. Then you build up to saying 1, 2, 3 and reward the dog. 1, 2, 3 and reward the dog. 1, 2, 3 and reward the dog. Now, some people reward on the 3, some people reward just after the 3. It really doesn't matter as long as you're doing it in a set pattern and it's the same every time. So you're going 1, 2, 3 and rewarding, 1, 2, 3 and rewarding. And every time that your dog hears the word 3, they're getting their reward. So now you can start to walk around a little bit. So start in your living room and just walk around going 1, 2, 3, and then hold a treat down for your dog. Again, hold it beside your knee if you need to, if that's where you want your dog to be aiming for. And then just go again, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And keep rewarding your dog on the 3. So eventually you start to march almost around your living room. So you're 1, 2, 3, reward. 1, 2, 3, reward. 1, 2, 3, reward. Now you don't necessarily have to do it that quickly. Do it at your natural walking speed, okay? But just make sure that you really reinforce that every time you say 3, the dog gets a reward. And what you'll find is as soon as you say 1, they'll start coming in towards you, okay? Now once they get really good at doing that, then you can start doing it with them on a lead. So again, start around your living room with them on a lead. 1, 2, 3, reward. 1, 2, 3, reward. And then you start doing it in the kitchen, then you do it in the garden, then you're marching up and down the road outside your house. Now, again, this isn't something that you should be doing for the entirety of your dog walk, because it's going to get bored very quickly for your dog otherwise, or they're going to get very fat, one of the two. But what you can do is you can start doing it in slightly distracting places when you need to get your dog through that place relatively unscathed and without barking. So one of my clients walks past a sheep field every day on their walk, and their dog used to go absolutely batty at the sheep every time they went past. So we taught them that every time they go past the sheep field, they play the 1, 2, 3 game. Okay, so now when the dog gets to the sheep field, he doesn't look for the sheep and start going batty. He starts looking for his dinner instead, because we actually use his dinner to do this with, and part of his dinner we use as chicken fillets. So it's something really, really nice and tasty, and he's quite peckish for it as well. Now he does get the rest of his food when he gets home, and if he wasn't to perform very well for one reason or other going past the sheep field, he would still get fed. It's not a case of he doesn't get fed if he doesn't perform. It's not like that at all. But it does just help him if it's a nice, really nice lump of chicken or something, and he's having it for his dinner. And and as soon as he gets to the sheep field, he knows exactly what's going to go on, because whether there's sheep in that field or not, we're going to play 1, 2, 3, and he's going to get chicken for marching along quite nicely beside us, going along that field. Okay, so so 2 things are happening. 1, he's learning to walk beside us, and 2, he's learning that he doesn't need to bark or go ballistic at the sheep in the field. Okay, so yeah, it took him a little while to get to that level, of course. To start with, there was some barking, and we just had to keep practicing in other places and build up to it again. But it's a really, really easy and effective way of teaching your dog to get past things without too much, aggro. Anyway, so we have come to the end of the PowerPoints and all the slides and videos and things. So well done on a successful afternoon spent learning about reducing your dog's barking. Today, you've learned what is a trigger, why dogs bark, canine body language, all about the bucket, how to help your dog feel calmer, how to train your dog alternative responses to barking, how to help your dog feel better about triggers so they don't need to bark, and then implementing everything you've learned today will help you and your dog feel so much better. They'll feel less need to bark. If you continue to struggle, or you need ideas on how to train a particular alternative response, etc., then please do get in touch with me. You can go through my contact page at www.locksdogs.co.uk, and I will just come out of this screen share. Okay, so what I am now doing is looking at a screen that I don't get. Have a minute. There we go. Right. So one thing I did get asked about, which I hadn't put into the presentation, was what do we do about demand barking? And now demand barking is slightly different because it's not necessarily barking at a trigger, which is why I hadn't put it into the presentation. But demand barking, if we go back to our toddler analogy again, if you imagine that a toddler wants the packet of sweets, and they say, "Mum, can I have a packet of sweets?" She'll go, "No." "Mum, I want my packet of sweets." "No." "Mum, I want a packet of sweets." "No." "Mum, I want a packet of sweets." Now you've either got two choices. You can either give them the packet of sweets, and next time they want a packet of sweets, it starts all over again. "Mum, I want a packet of sweets." "No." "Mum, I want a packet of sweets." "No." "Mum, I want a packet of sweets." Or you can brave it out and just ignore that barking. Obviously, if there's a reason for the barking, like they're hungry or they need the toilet or they're scared of something, then I'm not saying ignore that. Do not ignore that at all, ever. But if it is literally they want lots of attention, for example, then don't necessarily give them attention in that moment, but make sure you give them plenty of attention at other times, because they still probably have a need for attention. It's just they're going about the wrong way of getting it. So make sure that you're providing everything they need, and then they might not necessarily need to demand bark. But however, if they are demand barking, then unless it's something urgent and there's something they actually need, like the toilet, or they're worried about something, then you don't necessarily have to give in. Okay. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today. So if you have any questions or you have anything you want to talk to me at all about, then I would be really, really glad to hear from you. Likewise, if you have any reviews or anything like that, or anything you would like to see covered in future masterclasses, or anything you think I should have added to this one, please do get in touch with me. I love to hear from you, and I will see you all soon. Bye.